Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. The analogy of the carrot and the stick is a very common idiom for us. We know that this represents, the carrot refers to something encouraging and motivating factor for us, while the stick is a consequence. But this idiom did not become common in the English language until the mid-19th century, so it's relatively young. In fact, one of the earliest usages that we can find is in a publication in 1849, referring to a caricature that the author had seen. Two donkeys, one on a donkey working hard, trying to hit it from behind with buckthorn branches. Frowning, the donkey annoyed, moving forward somewhat slowly. Another person just resting on the donkey, dangling the carrot with a stick in front, and that donkey moving much faster. So the idea is that we get more out of encouragement than we do out of simply the threat of consequences. But in our humanity, in our fallen humanity, we do still need the threat of consequences at times, don't we? And so in our gospel passage today, we do have both. And in fact, the consequences may stand out more than the encouragement in some readings. After all, we hear, whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever wants to gain the world will forfeit his soul. These are what we would call significant consequences. And I hope that motivates us. But yet, in between these two statements, we have the carrot, which is in contrast to these sticks. Here, Jesus says, "Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." That is the gospel. And in the English language, what we translate from the Greek, evangelion, gospel simply means good news. So it should be an encouragement, more of a carrot. Jesus motivates us more by the carrot, the gospel, than the stick. That's why we call it the gospel, the good news of the coming of his kingdom. But yet, nonetheless, in order to receive this good news in our fallen humanity, this is the passage right here is evidence that we need to have some consequences to make us hear those encouraging words. And so it's kind of like somebody who has ADHD. And now it's good for us to know a little bit about what was commonly in our modern day called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, because by most accounts, more than 10% of children manifest what clinicians are calling ADHD. In adults, especially with smartphones, the number is now greater than 10% as well. So we all know and love people who have ADHD. And the reason why I say this is because it presents a bit of an analogy for us for what's going on here. And all of us have issues with focusing in one way or another. So we'll all relate to what I'm about to share. But here's the thing with those who have ADHD. They have a little bit less dopamine than the rest of the population. Dopamine is what makes people feel motivated, makes them feel focused. So people with ADHD really want carrots. And so that's why, the proverbial example for the person, the kid with ADHD, is that he wants the carrot of the video game, not cleaning up the kitchen table, right? And that plays out in many ways. And so where's the carrot? Where's the carrot? I don't feel alive unless I have carrots. We all appreciate this, though, on a larger level. But here's the other thing that we know about those who have this neurological way about them, is that they have a hard time understanding time. They're needing carrots. They don't understand the passage of time quite as much as the majority of the population. That's why they tend to run a little on the late side. But here's the thing. Here's what clinicians will tell you, and this is determined, that if the consequences are great enough, then people with ADHD can be remarkably focused if the consequences are great enough. It's what they call hyper-focus, and they can engage, right? So as much as the carrots are what's needed for them to have as much dopamine as the rest of the population, the consequences will sometimes be what they need to really get them to be engaged. As one 18th century chaplain to those who were facing execution said, "Death has a marvelous way of focusing the mind." Many criminals, when they see this deadline, this consequence coming up, they tend to get their lives in order very quickly, he said. Be very open to receiving the gospel at that point. Well, all of us, being incarnate creatures in the world, have this kind of ADHD approach to the worldly things over spiritual things at times. We want the carrot, at Lent especially, don't we recognize this? Well, I need some gratification of this food. I can't get through this day unless I have this thing that I was supposed to give up. And so this is a fact of our humanity, and certainly Jesus, when he wants to lead us to greater spiritual realities, even though he gives us that carrot of the gospel, understands our nature and includes consequences as well, includes the stick. Again, what we just heard. He who would save his life will lose it. He who desires comfort above all, makes a God of comfort, will lose his life. He who seeks after the world in the ways that we all are tempted to do on occasion, if that becomes the dominant thrust of your life, you will forfeit your life. But yet the promise, he who loses his life for my sake will find it. Life, you will find it. And what I'll say is that life is not just something, what we're going to unpack for a moment here as we look closer to this passage, that life is not just something far away, not just something after we die, not just something in the way distant future. It's something that we experience now, even in the midst of carrying the cross. Follow him, Jesus says. Find him. Find life. Now we have a microcosm of this as when we look at the physical endeavor of an endurance event. And so Lance Armstrong was famous in saying, pain is temporary. It lasts a minute, or an hour, or a day, or a year, but eventually it will subside and something else will take its place. If I quit, however, it lasts forever. That surrender, he says, even the smallest act of giving up, stays with me. So when I feel like quitting, he says, I ask myself, which would I rather live with? Again, the pain for an hour, part of a day, or the victory that lasts forever. And so the neurologist Andrew Huberman, Stanford neurologist, done some brain surgery, popular speaker on the matter, he explains that as he studied those who were able to push themselves in physical endeavors, he realizes that they do not lie to themselves by trying to say, this is not painful. That might work for a little bit on occasion, but eventually you just don't trust yourself if you try to tell yourself this isn't hard. And so, same thing with carrying the cross. The cross is difficult, there's no doubt about that. But as Fulton Sheen is famous of saying, following God is hard, but not following God is harder. At least we find that soon enough. The consequences of not following God are not just in the end, at some day of judgment that seems too far off to recognize. That comes in this life, actually. When we find the malaise that comes from not being our best, from not seeking the call that we've been given. And so when people are able to push through physical endeavors, exemplary athletes at the elite level, but also at the amateur level. We receive dopamine from the end. So as they're pushing through the activity, they're able to recognize the reward is coming, the reward is at hand, and they actually taste of that reward while they're going through their activity. They don't say this isn't painful, but they're able to embrace that reward in the midst of it. And so it is that as throughout the gospel, as it's unpacked, as Paul unpacks the gospel, he says we have, in the Holy Spirit, we have a foretaste of the life to come. We taste of the life to come now, in the midst of the crosses that we carry. So the cross, on one hand, when we read our gospel passage today, can sound a bit like a stick itself. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. But as he continues, he shows us that the carrot is actually in the cross. And this becomes more clear as we look at the very end of this passage. And so, as we continue, Jesus says, "For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done." Now, if we stop right here, actually, and that's actually where our lectionary reading stops, then that doesn't really sound like a carrot to me, because there's really no one at the end of his life, and you know this as a pastor, as you counsel many people towards the end of their lives, no one really feels like they've done enough. No one really feels like they've earned their place in the judgment day at the end of their lives. So to hear that he will repay each person according to what he has done, that's not the encouragement here. But then it continues, one more verse. "Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." You see, he's saying that victory is imminent. It is imminent enough that it is not just some far-off judgment day at the end of time. Some of you will experience the fullness of the kingdom in your life now. That's how close it is. So how do we interpret this, and why might it have been left off from our gospel reading? I think for no good reason, but I understand. They're thinking like, all right, well, if we understand this to be the return of Jesus at the end of time, then how do we reconcile this that some people will not taste death? This is confusing to some people reading this. Did he actually, like Paul seems to think in his writings, that Jesus would return, from his ascension in our lifetime? Well, you see, even in the earthly life, if we think of the effects of a kingdom, they're manifold, right? When a king is sworn in, when he at his coronation day, he has received his kingdom. When he wins a battle, years later, he has come into his kingdom. He is, the glory of his kingdom has become manifest. When ultimately he's remembered towards the end of his life, he's come into the fullness of his kingdom. See, there are many levels to coming into one's kingdom. And so some think this might refer to the transfiguration, which follows just after in Matthew's gospel. And that's a legitimate interpretation. Yes, it is that. He shows his kingdom to some extent in his glory on Mount Tabor. Some think it's when in AD 70, when his predictions of the fall of the temple came true, and the church, and that old order was replaced then by the new order of Christ's kingdom. Yes, that is the coming of the kingdom, which was in the lifetime of these disciples. The Transfiguration, AD 70, many would live to see that. Is it the end of time? Certainly that's a manifestation of the kingdom too, Jesus coming in glory. There's one other that very few commentators will mention, but on the cross itself. Because remember, in the upper room, he said, "I will not taste of the fruit of the vine until I come into my kingdom." And on the cross, he received the vinegar, which is fruit of the vine. You see the context here? He's talking about the cross. And then he, without any shift, talks about coming into his kingdom. That is included. That's his glory. And so when we see the verse preceding, when it says, I will repay each person according to what he has done. Is he repaying you according to what you have done, or what Jesus has done for you? He will repay each person according to what he has done on the cross. Will you receive that victory? So truly we are called to carry the cross. He says, carry the cross. But you and I are not trailblazers. He has carried the cross for us. He has cleared the way. Yes, there still may be some thorns growing across, that I need to move out of the way that might catch you on occasion. But he has cleared the way so you can follow. We call that grace. So all this, as we begin to wrap up here, I almost want to just pause and let that sink in for a moment. But as we begin to wrap up here, I just want to say this is what theologians call the already not yet dynamic of the scriptures. We can all understand that. There is an already aspect. The kingdom is here, yet it is coming. As I just heard a priest of a final Dominican who helped establish Mount Calvary in the Catholic Church, quoted as saying, "The Blessed Virgin Mary in her holiness is our assurance that Jesus' promises will come to pass. She received that grace fully, and that is the promise that you will receive the same grace. You have received the same grace, although it is being fulfilled in you gradually as you grow in holiness, as you carry the cross. When she was at the cross, in all her artwork, she's not despairing. She always has hope because she sees the end. She's able to, more than anyone else, is able to taste of the time that is to come now. She's able to, like those great athletes, are able to partake of the end in the midst of time. And that is not just imaginary, that is reality in the Holy Spirit. You can call upon that. So in the end, I just want to quote from you Billy Graham, who speaks to us of the glory of the cross. Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, the angels, that Jesus will come with his angels in the glory of his Father." Paul says that he glories in the cross, but it was an instrument of shame. How could he do this? He gloried because the most selfless act ever performed by men or angels took place upon it. He saw emanating from that rough, unartistic beam upon which the Son of God had been crucified, the radiant hope of the world, the end of the believer's bondage to sin, and the love of God shed abroad in the hearts of men. And so it is, as he concludes, "I only know that all who come to the cross in simple, trusting faith lose all their guilty stains and find peace with God." So let us embrace the carrot in the cross. Let us find him in the way of the cross. Let us follow him, and let us find life.